Hansa Paribrajakacharya Sutara Satashi Shimad A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai Prem se kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopinatha Shai Kunda Radha Kunda Giri Govardhan Ki Jai Shri Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai Mayapur Dham Ki Jai, Jagannath Puri Ki Jai, Ganga Mai Ki Jai, Jamuna Mai Ki Jai, Tulsi Maharani Ki Jai, Bhakti-Devi Ki Jai, Samaveda Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Shri Shri Guru and Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Today we're continuing the reading of Srila Prabhupada Lilamrita Volume 1, This Momentous Hour of Need. Srila Prabhupada, His Holiness Satsvarup Das Goswami has just quoted Srila Prabhupada in one of his purports from the first canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, explaining the importance of broadcasting this message of Srimad Bhagavatam, even if there might be some discrepancies or some failures in the language that's being presented. And Prabhupada gave the example that if there's a fire in the house and your neighbors speak a different language, you can express yourself to the neighbors, even if they don't speak the same language, that there's a fire, come and help. It's an emergency time. So we were just in the middle of that analogy when the time was up. Certainly Kali Yuga was such an emergency. The house was on fire. Honest men who could understand the need would welcome Srimad Bhagavatam, even though it was now being presented, and this is what Srila Prabhupada considers of his own translations, it's in quote, with so many faulty and broken linguistic technicalities. Bhaktivedanta Swami was presenting Srimad Bhagavatam unchanged, with the greatest respect for Srila Vyasadeva, and that was his cardinal virtue. He was adding his own realizations, but not in a spirit of trying to surpass the previous masters. In the all-important matter of presenting the subject strictly in parampara, Bhaktivedanta Swami suffered from no faulty and broken technicalities. He knew that without the parampara, the Bhagavatam purports would have no value. Now we have to remember that this is the first time that Srimad Bhagavatam, which is the essence of all the Vedas and the commentary of the Vedanta Sutra, first time being presented in the English language. So this is it's just like discovering a new continent for the English-speaking world. Day and night, he typed at his desk beneath the small adjustable light that dangled from the ceiling on its cord. He sat on a thin mat, his back to the large pyramid that stood oddly upright within the bare room. This is Srila Prabhupada at his room in Chippiwada, because now that the printing is going on, he's only an hour's walk from the printer. So he sits there in his room at Chippiwada, typing whatever papers he's typed, gets taken to the printer for typesetting, the proofs come back to him. It's a constant flow of progress to getting his volumes printed. Pages accumulated, and he kept them in place with stones. Food and sleep, although necessary, were only incidental. This one little sentence here, pages accumulated, and he kept them in place with stones. One time while we were out distributing Srila Prabhupada's books to the libraries and universities, we were invited to go to Dwarka, because we had gone to a big Sanskrit conference and all the professors were inviting us. So we ventured to Dwarka, and this is way back, 1975. Practically no Western devotees had ever gone there. We didn't know what to expect. So we were bathing in the Gomati, and there the Gomati Shila that you'll see that's worshipped alongside of the Shalagram Shila in all the temples. There are small chakras all on the body of the Gomati Shila, which is a Dwarka Shila. So we didn't know what they were. We thought, oh, they're so beautiful, it could be a nice gift to bring back for all the devotees. So I filled up a whole bag of these beautiful Shilas. We came to Vrindavan, and I gave one to Pradumna, Prabhupada's secretary. I said, Pradumna, could you please ask Prabhupada the significance of these Shilas? So we thought that because when we were traveling in Andhra Pradesh, we saw that Prabhupada's godbrother was actually worshiping one of these Shilas, right along with the Shalagram Shila. So I thought they must be very special. Prabhupada would be really excited to see these Shilas. We hadn't begun the worship of Shalagram Shila yet in ISKCON. So when Pradumna brought in the Shila to show Prabhupada, he looked at it and he said, yes, they're very good for paperweights. So this is what Prabhupada was doing. He was keeping all of his papers in place with different stones. And this was Prabhupada saw these valuable Shilas as very beneficial for his work. Food and sleep, although necessary, were only incidental. So now, because Sri Krishna Pandit, his family, and also the family that was specifically assigned to take care of Prabhupada, that was the Shrikant Vedi's mother, they were looking after Prabhupada's personal needs so Prabhupada could concentrate full time on his writing. He was completely convinced that his Srimad Bhagavatam would create a revolution in a misdirected civilization. Thus he translated each word and gave each purport with exacting care and concentration. But it had to be done as quickly as possible. So today in the readings, there are two main subjects. The first subject is Prabhupada, the urgency of his work being an emergency, just like the house on fire. Although he considered his work to be with so many faulty and broken linguistic technicalities. Now we're going to fast forward 10 years to when Prabhupada's books were printed. Not only were these first 3 books printed, but then Prabhupada, with the assistance of his disciples, was getting now the Srimad Bhagavatam printed in Dainipan in Japan, along with printing in America. And these books were being taken by his sannyasi disciples and brahmachari assistants to the major universities all over America and Europe. This is the beginning of the Bhaktivedanta Book Trust Library Party. And whenever they would present the Bhagavatams, now Srila Prabhupada, he personally taught us how to put his books in the universities. He told us, he instructed us this in Bombay. He said, you go first to the head of the Sanskrit department and you show him the books. He will make an order because these books are highly scholarly for Sanskrit scholars. Then you take that order and you go from department to department and you collect more orders because every department has its own library. So in that way, in one university, you could get many orders. So when the devotees would go, following Prabhupada's program, to the universities, not only would they get orders, but they would ask the heads of the departments who they were speaking to for appreciations of Prabhupada's books. So Prabhupada, although nothing had been printed yet, now 10 years later, we're going to hear some of these appreciations from the department heads of so many different types of subjects. We're starting with one university in Nebraska. Now, in America, you have different cultures. America's a huge melting pot. It doesn't have just one culture as in India, where you had the Vedic culture and everything sprung from that. You have so many different cultures. And in the central part of America, that is the stronghold of Christianity. That's where all the Christians, everyone is Christian there. So, University of Nebraska, this was the Department of Classics. That's the classic literatures of the world. I just footnoted the wonderful things that each professor had to say about Prabhupada's books when they accepted the books in their particular field. It is one of those rare works which are truly useful to both the scholar and the layman. The books are beautifully produced, yet modestly priced. They should play a significant role in promoting serious study of Indian culture and religion in the English-speaking world. So this is purely Christian, the Christian world appreciating Srila Prabhupada's books. Now we go on to Oxford University in England. The professor of Indo-European philology. Philology is the comparative relationship between the different philosophies and languages. So he writes, it is a monumental English rendering of the Srimad Bhagavatam, made available for the first time to English readers. Srila Prabhupada has taken immense care to present before the reader a lucid and comprehensive exposition of the text. It's also a learned, logical, and crystal clear exposition of the intended meaning of this unique sacred scripture. So these are the top scholars of the world. They're speaking in very scholarly language, praising Prabhupada's books, and how both the scholars and the students will get advantage from reading this Srimad Bhagavatam. Now we have, after Oxford, we have Columbia University. Columbia University, at that time, when Prabhupada had come to America, was one of the few universities that had a huge department of Sanskrit, Oriental philosophy, Oriental Institute, all the different Vedic studies. I was going to go to the university there, but it was number 2 to Chicago. And Chicago University was the topmost of Oriental studies, and it was the head of the department of the Oriental studies that Prabhupada had the preface of his first Macmillan copy of Bhagavad-Gita. He wrote the preface acclaiming Prabhupada's Bhagavad-Gita. So the professor of Sanskrit at Columbia University, he wrote, "This monumental work will go far to bring the sublime message of the Bhagavatam to numerous Westerners who otherwise would miss this opportunity." So anyone who's a professor of Sanskrit had heard of Srimad Bhagavatam because it's the essence, the cream of all the Vedic literatures. And here this professor is acclaiming Prabhupada's work. Again, we're back at Oxford University in England, but this time it's the Department of Psychology. They acclaimed Prabhupada's books. This book is to be treasured. The clarity and precision of his commentaries on the text can rarely have been equaled. No one of whatever faith or philosophical persuasion who reads these books with an open mind can fail to be both moved and impressed. It's just amazing how these professors are appreciating Prabhupada's life work. Now we're at Harvard University. Department of Sanskrit and Indian Studies. Now, Harvard University is a theological, they study Christianity. They have a small department for Indian studies at this time. Now it might have increased, but in the 70s it was quite small. So the Sanskrit and Indian students would not choose Harvard as their first choice if they wanted to understand Indian philosophy. But in this department, the scholar has written, his commentary is remarkable from various points of view. They're a rare blend of traditionalism and modernism with an abundant fund of knowledge. It can be recommended to all students of Indian religion, culture, and philosophy. Now, this professor caught up how Prabhupada took the traditional commentaries of the Srimad Bhagavatam and with his Bhakti-Vedanta purports brought it into applicable modern-day techniques of living the Srimad Bhagavatam. Sanskrit scholars saying that. Now we have Canada, the University of Windsor, Professor of Asian Studies. It is amazing to see how Sri Bhaktivedanta Swami has in less than 10 years succeeded by his personal devotion, untiring energy, and efficient direction in organizing the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. So Prabhupada by that time had made such a mark in the world in just 10 years that the professors themselves were acclaiming Prabhupada's work. He has undertaken a stupendous project of rendering the entire Bhagavad into English. Srila Prabhupada has done an excellent service to the students of Sanskrit poetry by his able rendition of, and this is what this professor calls the Bhagavatam, the abode of divine joy. So they knew what they were talking about when they were praising Srila Prabhupada. It's not moving for some reason. Here. Whoops. I don't want to miss these. This is, again, the Midwest, where the Christians have their stronghold at the University of Arkansas. He's a professor of humanities and philosophy. Swami Prabhupada's explanation of the text is extraordinarily lucid and cogent in the light of contemporary problems. This edition of Bhagavatam is especially welcome at a time when India's wisdom is needed in the West. I recommend highly this edition of the Bhagavatam to anyone who wishes a sound and practical knowledge of India's spiritual wisdom. So the work that Prabhupada was doing had never before been seen by these scholars. Not only for the first time Bhagavatam, but Prabhupada was bringing welcome at a time when India's wisdom is needed in the West. They understood the need of Prabhupada's work and appreciated it. We have the University of Michigan, Department of Humanities. Srimad Bhagavatam is a valuable source material for several categories of readers. It is can be attractive to serious students and scholars of religion and philosophy. I recommend this series to anyone as an important and useful reference work. Now, as for the Srimad Bhagavatam being a reference work, we used to advertise Srimad Bhagavatam as the Vedic encyclopedia. This is long before the days of digital knowledge and computers. We had to read books, and there were books called encyclopedias from A to Z. Anything you wanted to know, you had to read in these books. So similarly, Srimad Bhagavatam was just like a Vedic encyclopedia, because Prabhupada put at the beginning of each of his cantos, each volume, a description of what you're going to read And you could go through those descriptions and pinpoint exactly what you were looking for, just like with an encyclopedia. That's why it's considered to be also a reference work. Now we come over to Australia. It is clear that these volumes are essential additions to the library of any university where Indological studies are pursued. Now in New York City, it is a rare treat for scholars as well as students. Swami Bhaktivedanta's translation is accurate, and his use of contemporary idioms in the commentary will appeal to both scholars and laymen. This is because Prabhupada was so well educated. He knew how to speak to the English-speaking public. He knew how their minds were thinking, and he was able to give examples that they would understand. This book will be a worthy addition to one's personal and/or college library. University of Leicester in England. It is a model of clarity and may be used with profit by all students of Indian religions. Here at last is a text of central significance with a sensitive commentary by a master from within the Bhakti tradition. Presents the text within its living spiritual context. So previously, before Prabhupada began translating these books, there used to be Sanskrit scholars who attempted to translate Mahabharata, Bhagavad-Gita, Vedanta Sutra, but they had no entrance into the field of bhakti. Now for the first time, Bhaktivedanta Swami was opening up that door of bhakti in the most essential of all of the text of bhakti, which is Srimad Bhagavatam. So the scholars were so impressed that now, finally, they could understand these teachings from the people who are actually practicing the teachings, not an outsider. This is professor of the history of religions. The Srimad Bhagavatam is the most celebrated of the Puranas. He knew what he was talking about, although he was in America. No serious student of Hinduism can afford to neglect Swami Prabhupada's translation of this text. Here is a valuable tool for both the student and teacher of world religions. Now this just goes on and on. I just have about 2 more to go, and then we'll continue with the history. This is in Scotland, the University of Edinburgh. We have many devotees from Scotland, and it was the Scottish church that Prabhupada went to, because from Scotland, many of the missionaries came here to India to wipe out the Vedic culture. And here in Scotland, they're appreciating Prabhupada's work. It is axiomatic that no book can be expected entirely to satisfy all its potential readers. Here is one, however, which can be said to come remarkably close to that ideal. Here we have the ideal of what an edition of a Sanskrit text for a Western audience should be. It is beautifully planned and printed. So we find sometimes, even in our preaching, we're invited to speak in colleges and universities, in big conventions. What are our academic qualifications? We're not PhDs, we're not huge theologians, we're simple devotees. But because we have the knowledge from Prabhupada's books, we're put in that place to present that knowledge. And this professor, he says, what book can fully satisfy a whole audience? But this book comes the closest. Boston University. I truly hope that Srila Prabhupada will complete his translation of the entire Bhagavad and continue to translate other eminent Sanskrit works as well. Undoubtedly, this work of Swamiji's is a great contribution to the troubled human society of today's world. That's exactly the way Prabhupada speaks. And here are the doctors, the PhDs, Professor of Indian Languages, using the exact same phrases that Prabhupada himself uses. The troubled human society of today's world. And he's praying that Prabhupada continue with his work. Now this Choice magazine, just like nowadays, because the devotees are so inspired, I used to dream of having a 5-storied bookstore here. And all the different Prabhupada's books, and then Prabhupada's disciples' books, and then all of the books. We have so many different subjects now, hundreds and hundreds of books. You'll see in our international bookshop, we run out of shelf space all the time. We don't have enough books. So Choice magazine is printed once a year and sent to all of the schools and libraries and universities recommending the best books that they should buy, because they have thousands of books to choose from. So Choice magazine said, it contains many lovely full-color illustrations. Even the dust jackets are replete with symbolism. So we know that when Prabhupada made his dust jacket, he personally designed that with Goloka Vrindavan, all of the Gutta planets, then underneath the Mahatattva. Just to read the dust jacket, you get a full Vedic philosophical class. So Choice magazine was highly recommending these books. We have another at Slippery Rock State College. We got quite a few devotees from there. I believe Dhanadhar Swami, he came from there. He was our first principal here in the Gurukula. The reviewer deems it a signal honor to strongly recommend this encyclopedic work, undertaken as a labor of love to all readers and students of Indian religion and culture. So this is just a little taste of how the scholars were appreciating Prabhupada's work. Prabhupada, in his complete Vaishnava humility, considered his English language to be broken, considered that there might be so many linguistic technicalities that he was overseeing. But the scholars themselves are praising Prabhupada's work, and they're hoping that he will go on and translate more and more of these Sanskrit works. So now we have a new topic today. It's a new section here in this chapter. In February of 1961, on Vyasa Puja Day, the anniversary of the appearance of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, Bhaktivedanta Swami was again in Vrindavan. So he particularly chose to be in Vrindavan. This is where the Pushpa Samadhi is of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. You can go and see at the Radha Damodar temple. It's in the courtyard with all of the samadhis of the great Vaishnavas. So Prabhupada, he decided to join with his godbrothers, many of them who were living here at that time. They had their own little mats all over Vrindavan. They're still here, those mats. Anytime you go into past Vidyapit, you're going towards Loy Bazaar, on the right-hand side there's one. If you go to the Madan Mohan temple, on the left-hand side there's one. All around Vrindavan, if you go to the railway station, there's one. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati wanted many, many different centers here. Prabhupada also wanted many centers in Vrindavan. He said, because we have so many qualified preachers, each man can go out, sit down, start to preach, and many, many people will come. So that's finally happening now, gradually. We have centers in Govardhan, we have our Jagannath temple, we have many different places now. ISKCON is reaching out within the Braj area. So Prabhupada came here to be with his godbrothers. In honor of their spiritual master, some of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's disciples had gathered, offered flowers before his picture, and held congregational chanting in the temple. Just as we do here, Srila Prabhupada at the first when he was teaching the devotees how to observe Vyasa Puja. He explained that a senior devotee should offer the arti to Srila Prabhupada. There should be flowers. There should be a feast presented. All the devotees should honor the feast together. But Bhaktivedanta Swami thought that they should be doing much more than that. They should be planning and executing the worldwide preaching mission that Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had desired. Instead, they were a gathering of independent individuals, each with his own small idea, each maintaining a small center or living at a center, but with no world programs, not even a program for India. Most of them had no plans or vision beyond their own bodily maintenance. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had asked for a governing body to conduct his movement, but there was no governing body, and practically there was no movement. Some who had fought bitterly were again on speaking terms and feared that any sudden organizational attempts now might simply stir up old animosities. At least they could gather together and make an offering to their spiritual master. So let us compare, because fresh in our memory is Srila Prabhupada's Vyasa Puja that we just celebrated about 3 days ago. The bond of love and joy that all of the generations of devotees shared together during Prabhupada's Vyasa Puja. We can't even fit all the devotees into the temple. So many devotees want to speak who don't get a chance to speak even. So the mood is completely different, because Srila Prabhupada, he carefully studied what Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati wanted his followers to do. And although his godbrothers might have not been able to do it, because Prabhupada independently took up the task that his spiritual master had given him, he was able to institute the governing body commission. He was able to use, if you ever get money, print books. All of the money he got would go for printing books. He was not concerned with building huge palatial temples just for devotees to live comfortably. He was interested in inner city preaching. We go to the cities to preach. We don't live a comfortable life away from the cities, away from the problems of humanity. We don't go into the mountains to meditate. So Prabhupada, having all these years, from 1922, now it's 1961, 40 years, trying to understand the real desire of his spiritual master. He knew what had to be done, and he wanted to wake up his godbrothers. Among his godbrothers, Bhaktivedanta Swami was a junior sannyasi. He had just taken sannyas 2 years earlier. Although a recognized writer and editor, he had no temples or followers. Yet he knew he was trying to follow Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. He saw himself helpless and alone against the vast forces of Maya. And that's because he didn't see his godbrothers engage in active preaching work. Whereas we have within ISKCON, it's all we talk about. Our services. Where are we going to preach next? Where are we going to go? How many devotees came? Every day you hear the announcements. How many people came and chanted Hare Krishna? How many books were distributed? How many donations came in for this and that project? How many devotees how many visitors we fed? 22,000, 25,000. It is so dynamic because Prabhupada took the orders of his spiritual master and imbibed them into ISKCON. ISKCON is just a carryover of everything that Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati wanted his disciples to do, but weren't doing. His godbrothers were not an army united against Maya's forces. ISKCON Prabhupada would often compare to an army. Sometimes we even get ridiculed because we become a little ballistic. We want everyone to love Krishna. But we're more like apathetic monks, growing old, holding on to religious principles and rituals devoid of life. So now Prabhupada, it's 1961. That means Prabhupada was about 65 years old. Most of you and some of you in the class are possibly over 60. But when you're over 60, when you're over 70, your physical strength reduces. But Prabhupada, his physical strength never reduced because he was being driven by spiritual energy. The devotees had to run to catch up with him when he would take his morning walks. He would sleep maximum 2 to 3 hours a night, and he would criticize the devotees, just eating and sleeping. So although they were so many years younger than Prabhupada, Prabhupada at the age of his 60s and 70s and finally 80s, he carried on this mission single-handedly, and we just tried to follow behind him, run behind him. How could they gather to worship their spiritual master without distressfully admitting their failure and, in the spirit of better late than never, trying to rectify it? No, they were already over the hill. They had finished. They didn't want to fight anymore. They were comfortable. They had their disciples. The disciples were bringing in money for maintenance. Everything was nice. Since the custom on Vyasa Puja Day was for each disciple to write an offering glorifying his spiritual master and to share it within the assembly of God brothers, Bhaktivedanta Swami wrote an offering more like an explosion than a eulogy, and humbly placed it before his God brothers for their response. Now, I'm very happy to inform everyone we were studying this book earlier with Prabhupada's poems, the Viraha Ashtakam and the Vrindavan Bhajan. We've gone through now 3/4 of this book together in these classes. So now this book has been reprinted in soft cover. It's about half the price of what it was before. The BBT Bombay just printed 3,000 copies. I would strongly recommend that everyone get this book so they can understand the Bengali and not just the English that we're presenting in this class, because there is no comparison to the beauty of the Bengali in Prabhupada's poetry. What Prabhupada says in 5 words would take 15 words in English and still not get it right. So you can learn Bengali this way. Every single word is translated, and it's done very poetically to follow in Prabhupada's mood. So today, we're going to begin to study there are only 2 more after this. And then Prabhupada's Bengali poetry stops because he reaches America. He doesn't write in Bengali anymore after that. He's only English. So this is some of the, Satsru Maharaj has taken out the essence of some of the poetry. But we're going to go through the entire poem, because once in a lifetime, at least, we should hear this poetry and understand Prabhupada's mood of preaching. So these are some of the excerpts that Satsru Maharaj has taken out. We'll hear these excerpts as we go through the whole poem. Even now, my God brothers, you return here on the order of our Master, and together we engage in this puja. But simply a festival of flowers and fruits does not constitute worship. The one who serves the message of the Guru really worships him. Oh, shame! Now, in the Bengali, Prabhupada says, chi, chi. In English, it's oh shame. It's just not the same. Oh shame, my dear brothers, aren't you embarrassed? In the manner of businessmen, you increase your disciples. Our master said to preach. Let the neophytes remain inside the temples and simply ring the bells. But just take a good look at the terrible situation that has arisen. Everyone has become a sense enjoyer and has given up preaching. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, if you read the full biography that Bhakti-Vikas Swami has compiled, he said, I made sannyasis and now they've become vilasis. Vilasi means a sense enjoyer. From the seas across the earth, penetrate the universal shell, come together and preach this Krishna consciousness. So Prabhupada was preaching to his godbrothers, most of them who were very senior to him. They had been sannyasis for 20, 28 years. Prabhupada is a new sannyasi. He's telling them, get up, preach. Then our master's service will be in proper order. Make your promise today. Give up all your politics and diplomacy. So politics and diplomacy, that's kutinati, right? Kutinati can mean many different things. It means hair splitting, it means fault finding, it means politics, diplomacy. So if you say kutinati, it's a lot more poetic and it says a lot more than politics and diplomacy. If the disciples of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati could join and preach together, there was every chance that they could create a spiritual revolution, which is what Prabhupada was aiming for, and which is what he accomplished. A spiritual revolution throughout the world, within the sinful world. That had been the hope of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. And Bhaktivedanta Swami expressed that hope in his Vyasa Puja offering. Now there's 3 more little lines that Satsvarup Maharaj has picked out. When will that day come when a temple will be established in every house, in every corner of the world? When will the High Court judge be a Gaudiya Vaishnava with tilak beautifully decorating his forehead? When will a Vaishnava winning votes be elected president of the land and preaching be spread everywhere? So Prabhupada often, when he went to different countries, he would ascertain whether this country could become a Krishna-conscious Ram Rajya. I was told that Prabhupada told the devotees that Mauritius would become the first Krishna-conscious country. Because so many devotees, even you go, I've never been there, but Prabhupada, when he went there, it's only a 40 square mile island, but so many devotees are there. Just like our temple president, Gokulananda Swami, he's from Mauritius. We have many devotees coming from Mauritius. So these were the dreams that Prabhupada had, that there would be a temple in every home, that the High Court judge would be a Gaudiya Vaishnava with tilak, and that the president of the country would be a Vaishnava. So at least we have the chief minister. He's doing so much here in Braj, developing you have an example of our Vrindavan project. We struggled for 20, 30 years. He came, gave 3 crores of rupees and developed the whole place within a year during the lockdown. And he's doing that all over for the holy places. So this was the essence of what Satsvarup Maharaj wanted us to hear of this poem, because he had limited space and he didn't want to make his Lilamrita too long. But with your permission, we're going to go through the whole poem now so that you can understand Prabhupada's mentality. This, because it's called the Vaishishta Astakam. So an astakam means 8 verses. Just we have the Sikshastakam, we have the Guruvastakam. And Vaishishta means distinction, the very special qualities, characteristics. So the translator, who is one of our godbrothers, Dasarath Sutta, I took most of his translation from there, but because Dasarath Sutta himself is a poet, he makes very beautiful, flowery translations. So I tried to condense it a little bit in some places. On this day, O my master, I made a cry of grief. I was not able to tolerate the absence of my guru. On this auspicious day, I've come with this offering, just to worship you, remembering your lotus feet. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's judgment is that renunciation is most important. Not only that, but such knowledge must be delivered to every conditioned being. So this is a little bit of a contradiction. How can we renounce and at the same time go to every living entity to give knowledge? Because renunciate usually stays distant from the public. But Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, his idea of renunciation is that you give freely all of this knowledge as a sannyasi. That's why this first Vashishta of the Astakam is called Characteristics of True Renunciation. The beginner in devotional service, that's the Kanishta, the neophyte, has no ability to solve this dilemma. But you are a Mahabhagavat. You have given us direction, just as Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati in his life. Although he was a sannyasi, he was constantly traveling, constantly mixing with people, with great politicians, with kings, with anyone who could help him to spread Krishna consciousness. One bewildered by ignorance, what kind of renunciate can he be? He will only be a Falgu Varagi, renouncing externally. Renunciation is actually the result of real spiritual emotion. Without such feeling, it is simply known as shobado. So, do we know what shobado is? Prabhupada was a chemist. He had Prayag Pharmacy. He used to mix his own formulas. So in a chemist shop, sometimes, just like in our shops, we have a display window, and we put all these different things that we have inside. So a show bottle in a chemist shop is a bottle of liquid. Sometimes it's red, sometimes it's green, sometimes it's blue, so that when the people look inside, they know that, oh, this is a medical shop. They have bottles. So, but in the display, it's called a show bottle. So I was wondering, how do you say show bottle in Bengali? So I was looking, it probably just says show bottle. So it's something that probably within the pharmaceutical field, they understood what show bottle meant. And now we understand. We can't be a show bottle Vaishnava, that we just put on our tilak, we put on our Vaishnav dress, but inside is just some colored liquid. It's not the real thing. We have to be the real true Vaishnava, inside and outside. But there is another show bottle for the purpose of preaching. That is the Lord's sannyas by which the Mayavadis are defeated. So we know that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, when he was being criticized by his own students for chanting the names of the gopis rather than chanting the names of the Lord, he said, well, and the Mayavadis, he said, the only way I can convince the Mayavadis of this philosophy is if I myself become a sannyasi. So he became a Mayavadi sannyasi, entered within their ranks, and turned them into Vaishnavas. So that's a different type of show bottle. He looks like a Mayavadi sannyasi, but actually, he's a pure Vaishnava, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Lord Chaitanya's philosophy is beyond Varnashram. It is Bhagavad Dharma. for putting an end to all cheating processes of religion. Performing dry renunciation, there can be no real preaching. Therefore, Yukta Vairagya is the topmost essence of Lord Chaitanya's teachings. This Yukta Vairagya was recommended by Rupa Goswami in his definition of bhakti, and it was carried down through the disciplic succession to Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, who most expertly executed this Yukta Vairagya by printing books, by using motor cars, by sending his disciples abroad on ships. Sannyasis aren't allowed to go in the ocean, but he didn't mind breaking these small principles for the higher principle of saving humanity. That sannyas which I have given you, this is a quotation from Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, is for preaching in devotion. The faithless sense enjoyers are unable to understand this. So that's the beginning, the characteristics of real renunciation. Now we're on the second division, which is called revolutionary preaching in public places, because this is what Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati instituted. He sent his disciples to the busiest places to preach. Generally, the sannyasis renounce everything and go and stay in the mountain caves. But you, O Master, keep your sannyasis in mansions of marble. So even of course, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, he was very happy at the mat, at the first place, but one of his disciples, who was fabulously wealthy, he wanted to build a beautiful marble temple for his spiritual master. And he built the Bagh Bazar temple. He got the land. He saw all the details, because Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, he was busy preaching, traveling, and printing books. He didn't care about a marble temple, but his disciple wanted it. So he accepted it as an offering. But later, is it time? He told Srila Prabhupada here in Radhakund that if I could sell this marble and use the money to print books, he didn't care about the marble temple. He wanted to print books. So although the devotees were living in beautiful temples, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati found out that they began fighting over which nice room they would stay in, because some of the rooms were overlooking the Ganges. They were fighting to stay in those rooms rather than on the other side of the temple. So he wanted to get rid of he just wanted to use the money for preaching. To see a sense enjoyer is like drinking poison. But you, O my master, deliberately visit British governors of Indian provinces just to give them your darshan. And he would invite these governors to come to Mayapur. And they would become impressed by what Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati was doing with his exhibitions. He had fantastic diorama displays. And the governors, they would be personally invited by Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, who would escort them around the exhibitions and see all of the preaching work that was going on. Mlechas and Yavanas are forbidden to enter the Hindu temples, but you, my Lord, make them chairmen and sit them in the assembly of devotees. So in whose footsteps was Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati following? Directly, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Haridas Thakur, he was born in a Mlecha family. He was made the Namacharya. Ramananda Roy and his entire family, they were considered to be Sudras, of course, but they were made governors. And later, he was the most intimate associate of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Mahaprabhu saw beyond all physical and caste consciousness. He saw the soul. And Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, in the same mood, he would invite, it didn't matter who they were, he would invite everyone to take up Krishna consciousness. Hindus are not allowed to cross the ocean, but you send your devotees overseas to preach on your behalf. In the cities of Kali Yuga, the instructions of the bona fide spiritual preceptors are forbidden. Forbidden means that the people would not allow the preachers to preach. They didn't want to hear the message of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. In Russia, Prabhupada explained before of course, now we have the most number of devotees in Russia, the most number of book distribution in Russia. But when Prabhupada first went there, he said that anyone who never wants to hear the name of God takes birth in Russia. And that's because the communist philosophy was, it was against the law to worship God. If you worship God, for instance, when the devotees started to preach, they were put into prisons, they were tortured, they were put into psychiatric wards and given horrible medicines to take this poison of God out of their mind. So that's why the instructions, the bona fide spiritual preceptors are forbidden in Kali Yuga. You're not allowed to preach in Kali Yuga, but you intentionally spend all your time there because he knew that the people were innocent, the people, they wanted God, but the demoniac leaders would not allow them to worship God. This is what Prabhupada noticed when he went to Russia for the first time. Some devotees want to hide in a secluded place to perform their bhajan. But in your view, such selfish behavior is totally unacceptable. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, he wrote a whole poem, Vaishnav K, that what type of a Vaishnava are you? You're pretending to be a Vaishnava by sitting in a solitary place chanting so many lakhs of rounds, but what's in your mind? So if you read that poem of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, you can see that he did not encourage solitary nirjan bhajan. He encouraged his disciples to get out of the temples and preach Krishna consciousness. So now it's 7 o'clock. We're only on the second Ashtakam, so we'll have to continue next week. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Hare Krishna.